Here we go. Hello and welcome. Excuse me. Welcome to Short Bites, a Stephen King podcast. Today, I am joined with Chris Kosarich, and we're going to be discussing Stephen King's short story "Gray Matter." Now, I know I just butchered your last name again. Can you say? I'm probably going to continuously forget because I have Kosarich stuck in my head. But
It's okay, Jason, and thank you for having me. I'm honored to be asked to be a part of this. So everybody that knows me, in fact, I can't see it because of the way I'm sitting, but I've got on my Stephen King rules shirt. So,
nice.
but no, I'm really honored to be a part of this. So thank you so much for inviting me. No, I mean, I obviously have lived with this last name my whole life. It can be pronounced Kosarich or Kosarich, which is how I pronounce it. But either way is fine.
Okay, awesome. So would you mind giving yourself a brief introduction to the listeners, like
Yeah,
you and what you do and your writing?
yeah, so absolutely. So my name is Chris. Obviously, I'm a huge Stephen King fan. So, I mean, obviously, Jason reached out to me because he's read some of my work before. I'm a published, mostly an indie published horror author and a ardent Stephen King fan. I love everything he's written. Essentially, the reason why I write horror fiction is solely because of Stephen King.
Hmm.
I guess I should give a little bit of a preface how I got there. In my probably in my mid-teens, I was required to. Well, I became a book reader because I was required to read in middle school, read a book, write a book report. So that started my love affair with books. But I hadn't yet discovered Stephen King. Wasn't until I was in high school, pretty much my junior year, and I was wandering through the bookstore back home where I grew up, and I spied a paperback copy of Pet Sematary. It had the classic murky cover with the cat and the graveyard scene, and
My favorite cover of that.
exactly. And I picked it up and I flipped it around, and instead of a plot synopsis on the back, it just had I think it was a Publisher's Weekly quote or a quote from Stephen King himself. I can't remember, but it said, "This is something to the effect of this is the single most frightening thing I've ever written," or "This is the single most frightening thing he's ever written." And I was sold. Bought it, went home, devoured the book, and became an immediate fan. And then went out and bought every single thing he's written at that time and since then. So, and it was at that point that, I became a massive fan of horror fiction. I had liked it previously. I liked horror movies previously. I mean, I grew up watching some of the classics. But I had been writing stuff previously, but not horror. I wrote in a different genre because I was writing stuff that I was reading as a kid. But when I found that book and totally fell in love with it, that's when I knew that's what I wanted to write. And I
Nice.
basically grabbed everything I could from him. The next author I discovered was Dean Koontz. I know people are, some people love him, some people don't care. I love him.
Hmm.
And that book was Phantoms. And so really it was at that point I totally fell in love with the horror genre, long story short. So, and I started on my journey, and I'm 57 now, and I was probably 16 or 17 then. So it's been a while, but
That's
totally loved writing horror.
that's pretty cool. There a lot of I think Stephen King fans they either love or hate Dean Koontz. I guess like the rest of the reading populace. But I read during the 80s and the 90s. I read a lot of Dean Koontz,
Sure.
and he's certainly instrumental to my reading habits and even my writing.
Well, I think that was the golden age, right?
Yeah.
For a lot of us that grew up on horror, especially, paperbacks from hell, right? Paperback horror. Um, the output that King had in the 80s, especially, and Dean Koontz as well. I mean, that was, they were younger men, right? And,
Hmm.
they were writing for, well, I think they both were doing it for different reasons. I know Koontz started out writing science fiction, and he kind of got in, and he wrote some other things too, but then he kind of got pulled into horror because that was the hot market at the time. And it just took off from there. But I think that, looking back on it now, I know a lot of the criticism that Stephen King gets now is, he doesn't write horror anymore, or he's not like, well, first of all, he's how old? It's just like
Yeah.
with Keats too. I still enjoy reading his stuff. His stuff is still has elements of horror to it, but also suspense and science fiction. When it's easy to say your your art, your creative output is like this when you're in your 20s and 30s, but when you're in your 60s and 70s and hopefully 80s, your sensibilities have changed a little bit. You still have the gift of writing and
Hmm.
creating a story and entertaining people, but your outlook is different. I think that's why King, he loves true crime. He loves crime stories. That's why a lot of the Holly books and stuff are more crime thrillers than they are really horror, maybe with elements of horror in it. But you're a different you're somewhat of a different person the older that you get, and I think that reflects in their books. I
Absolutely.
still
Yeah.
enjoy them. So
Yeah. I think you said something interesting there about writers when they get older. Well, not only that they change, but their output changes too. But I just turned. Well, I've turned 50. I'm halfway through my 50th year.
congratulations.
Um, yeah, we made it to the club.
What's
Uh,
funny about that is I remember, it's not funny now, but I remember when my dad, I think my dad is 81 now, or 80. I should know this, but anyway, I remember teasing him when he turned 50, and I told him, Dad, you're a half a century old. Ha. It's not real funny now.
yeah,
And he probably told me something like, you're going to be there one day, son. So.
yeah. But I feel that my writing output has increased, um, and it seems like yours has too.
Yeah, I mean, I work a full-time job. I guess I
Yeah,
should mention this during my introduction. I'm also a veteran bookseller with Barnes& and Noble. I've been with the company now for almost 30 years.
nice.
So I've seen every kind of trend, everything. And I still mostly enjoy what I do. But where was I going with this? I just lost my train of thought. I was
I
going.
do that all the time. But your output,
Thank you.
like your
Yeah,
increase in output.
Thank you, Jason. I work a full-time job, so my writing, I fit in around that. My average, of pretty much as far as creatively, as far as books go, I usually try to put a book out a year,
Hmm.
and in between short stories and things like that. Now, I have done 2 books a year. I must have been insane. A lot of that has to do with when you get to that point when you get the first draft done, you get it edited. I work with an editor, send that off to her. It just happened to fall one year where I had a book come out earlier in the year and a book come out later in the year. But typically for me, it's one a year.
Yeah.
Um,
Uh,
but it's
I think
it's it. No, go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, but I would love to be a full time writer. That's just not possible. I don't like being a starving artist. So, and I like having electricity
Yeah.
and internet. So, I have to work full time. And that's the challenge, in between, responsibilities with, your personal life and your family and fitting that time to create. That's a big challenge. Um,
Yeah.
and as
Uh,
I'm sure you know,
yeah, well, I was just gonna say that I think it's the change in circumstances. When a lot of us when we're younger, we focus on family and jobs and whatnot. And I also had this grueling factory job where I was doing 12-hour shifts,
yeah,
and that really affected my writing output. It went from writing a fair amount to zero, only
I,
short stories.
yeah, for sure. Well, in my job too, I mean, I'm in retail. So, I guess a lot, to the average person, they probably think that bookstore employees sit around reading books all day. That's the furthest thing from the truth. We work our
Mhm.
asses off, and especially these days. So, I mean, like I said, being around books is a joy. Getting people to pick up a book by an author that they've never read before, and that interaction, that's the fun part of the job. But we do a lot of work. So yeah, I mean, some days I come home and I'm too exhausted to, you know.
Yeah. Do you have like a writing schedule that you stick to? Do you write in the evenings or do you write in the mornings?
For me, which generally which works best is on a day off. Because with my work schedule, it's real unless I'm editing, because that's a little different.
Hmm.
Usually I can fit in some time after work or before work if I'm working on getting edits done. But the creative process, what works best for me is early in the day, so in the morning when you're fresh.
Yeah, me too.
And
I can't write in the afternoon anymore.
yeah, it's hard. I think
Yeah.
too, a lot of times that has to do with age. I hate to say
Mm,
that, but we tend to slow down later in the day. So creatively, that's really tough. But yeah, for me, it's usually on a day off, early in the day. When I'm refreshed and not as tired. And
yeah.
I'm one of those. Um, and I, Unless I'm hot on a story, I'm trying to finish something with a personal deadline. I do best on sort of like chunks of time. So I'll sit down and write for a couple hours, get up, have lunch, do something, walk around, and then go back to it. And that's usually what works best for me. And I'm also a pantser too. I never outline. I take notes, but I pretty much know where it starts, where it's going, and just let it all develop organically.
Yeah, I enjoy writing that way too. I just find it more. I've tried almost everything. I've tried
Mhm.
outlining and whatnot, and
Yeah.
the pantsing just works best for me, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's everybody has to find um, that method that works best for them, and that sometimes that takes a while. When I
Mhm.
first started writing, I remember handwriting an outline, and I think what changed for me was getting to the point where I was writing a chapter out because I didn't want to miss out on details, and I just realized at that point this is what I'm doing is writing it. So, and sometimes it takes years for some people to get to that point, but you just have to find a method that works best for you.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll talk about different books because you're here for 2 episodes, back to back episodes too.
Oh, wow.
So, I would in this episode, I would like to discuss your Mr. Jack books. I believe that there's 2 of them, and I read the first one, which is I think a novelette.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it. So, can you tell us about book
Yeah.
one and book two?
And Jason, by the way, I wanted to thank you. I was thinking about this too. You were the first, and I think this was a video review that you did. I think you were the first person that ever did a video review of any of my books.
Oh yeah,
So
I
thank
remember that. We talked about that on
you.
Facebook,
We
and you're
did.
quite welcome.
So yeah, so actually there's 3 books. My latest book, which is now part of the Mr. Jack trilogy, came out in October, which is this one. It's called Mr. Jack Requiem. And this one came out in October, so this is my latest book. And basically, and you'll be interested in this, the second one, um, which was more of I guess you could call it a sequel to Mr. Jack because it involves a lot of the same characters. This has been my best-selling book.
Nice. I
Um,
mean, that cover.
yeah, and actually, what happened was when my cover artist was doing Requiem, Mr. Jack Requiem, she's like, I really don't like the font on the first 2 books. It's too plain. And when she came up with this one, she goes, I want to redo the covers, tweak them a little bit, and have the fonts all match. So that's why the font style is a little different. And here's Mr. Jack. So I call this the Summer Mr. Jack or Summerdale trilogy.
Hmm.
And as you know, since you read Mr. Jack, it's my love letter to Halloween, the best holiday ever.
Yeah.
And the way I ended it was kind of open ended, as you recall. And
Hmm.
so when I wrote Pumpkin God, it was more like, I have more of a story here I could do something with. And essentially, it's a self contained story. In the edition of Pumpkin God, I have Mr. Jack in the back. And there's an author's note in the front saying, if you haven't read Mr. Jack before reading this, you need to read that first.
Hmm.
Um, the latest book, Mr. Jack Requiem, is actually kind of a prequel. It's not set in current times. It takes place when the witch from Mr. Jack, Josie Howard, was a little girl. It's all of her most of her backstory. So, in a very critical time in her life when she was a little girl. We get to meet her mother, who's only mentioned in Mr. Jack. It was a challenge because it was set in the 1930s in Florida. So I had to do a lot of research into that time period. Crazy stuff like, did people in the 30s use refrigerators?
Hmm.
What kind of cars were popular in the 30s? Um, but it was a blast to write. And it fills in a lot of blanks. And I introduced a pair of villains that were pretty scary and pretty creepy too. So, but it kind of brings the whole storyline full circle, which
Nice.
is something that I wanted to do, but I wasn't quite sure if I could pull off. And when you read Pumpkin God, you'll know what I mean, because there's something that comes, there's a monster in Night of the Pumpkin God that sort of is hinted at where it came from. So I kind of give it more of an explanation in
Hmm.
Requiem. So,
Now, do you have to read all three books in order, or after the first one, Mr. Jack, can you bounce around a little? Or
yeah, so I mean, I call it the Mr. Jack Summerdale trilogy. So my recommendation is reading Mr. Jack first, then Pumpkin God, and then reading the new book, because even
okay,
though it's set when Josie was little, it dovetails nicely to the rest of the stories.
nice. So yeah, we'll talk about more books of yours in the next episode. But you mentioned that Stephen King is like a direct influence, saying that I think it was Pet Cemetery was the book you read that made you want to become a writer.
Yeah,
What is it about Stephen King that pulls you?
it's a great question. And also, I think Pet Cemetery too is his darkest book. My all time favorite, if I'm unless I'm getting ahead of myself here, is The Shining. I usually reread that every couple years.
Nice, yeah.
Um, I think it's with King. I think he resonates with, even resonates with people that wouldn't really consider themselves horror readers, except
Hmm.
they read Stephen King, because I think his books appeal to just about anybody. Mainly because his books, his characters are all ordinary people, and they're thrust into these really frightening, terrifying situations. And I think he's really good at sort of tapping into the relatability that we can have with different backgrounds and different people. And I think that's his biggest strength, is that he's not King is pretty much a sort of a blue collar type.
Hmm.
He came from humble backgrounds, and I think his writing still has that sort of sensibilities to it. So I think many different people can relate to his stories, just because his characters are very believable and relatable.
Absolutely, I totally agree with that. I mean, it's one reason why I keep coming back to King, because it's like these people.
Right.
A variation of like the people who populate his books.
Yeah, and his they're not even with his recent output, and I know the Holly books are very divisive, and I know where you stand with them, but even her character, she was a walk on, as he calls her, right, in the Mr. Mercedes trilogy. And he grew to fall in love with her character, and her character kind of grew as the original trilogy, the Mercedes trilogy. But she's such a reluctant heroine. She's got her own quirks and things that she struggles with.
Hmm.
But at the end of the day, she puts her head down and she barrels through it, and she's brilliant and she's funny. She's not your typical hero, typical heroine. But I think but she's like the rest of us,
Yeah,
right? We've all got our things that we need to work on, or challenges, or demons, whatever you want to call it.
yeah,
King himself, obviously, it's very well known that King was a raving alcoholic and a drug user, and he, thank God, was able to overcome that. So I think, having that kind of background, he creates characters that are very believable, because they're just like us. And
yeah.
I think that's his greatest strength, is
Ab-
just creating those worlds that we can see ourselves in. You know.
Absolutely, yeah. I love Holly because she's not a poopy head.
Amen, brother. Yeah, I mean, she's just, and I understand why some people just don't care for her. I get it. Everybody's different, right? We all like different things. But how can you just not cheer for her? She's the most unlikely of heroes, but
Hmm.
she's got a good heart. And I just think we live in a crazy time, as you know,
Hmm.
and having a character like that, I think, is important. Not
Yeah,
just because of what she represents, but just because I'd like to think there's a little bit of Holly in all of us, right?
yeah, for sure. At least hopefully.
Exactly.
You bring up an interesting point, though. It's not just Holly. There's a lot of people, like when you're on Facebook and you see people talking about Stephen King, there's a lot of hate for new Stephen King works, not just the Holly books.
Yeah,
So how do you feel about early King versus new King?
excellent question. I mean, I think that like we're going to get into here with the short stories. I think it's it's vintage King. Um, his early stuff is iconic. Obviously all the movies. Even when he was doing his short stories that we're going to talk about, like the Night Shift stuff. I mean, a lot of those stories he was writing. They were first published in men's magazines, as you know, Cavalier,
Yeah.
and that was solely to keep the lights on. To
Yeah.
keep the phone working because he had to. So there's a certain raw, visceral desperation almost in those stories that they're not very long because a lot of his later story collection, his stories can be kind of long, almost novelette length.
Hmm.
But these were very short to the point. They got right to the point. There was always a gut punch at the end, and I think there's a lot to be said for that era of King. He didn't hold back, and I know a lot of these books, his sort of core titles, right, came out at a different time when there was no internet, no smartphone technology, but there's a simple beauty in a lot of those stories. They can still resonate with most people.
Absolutely. Now, this next question, I keep going on about because everyone answers the same except for my original answer. I think I'm going to change that answer. I keep saying that, but I haven't changed it yet. So it's a would you rather question. So
All right.
would you rather only read Stephen King novels or only his shorter works? That includes his novellas for the rest of your life.
Oh man, how dare you? Um, Boy, I will tell you that I am a huge fan of his story collections. I mean, obviously, I'm a huge fan anyway, right? But I would probably say, you know, just because the novels were the first thing I read of his and felt
Mhm.
I'm going to probably stick with that because, you know, Stephen King, I think, famously said, he compares his work to like McDonald's Big Mac and fries. That,
Mhm.
and granted, I don't eat that stuff a lot because it makes me feel like crap, but I
Yep.
get what you're saying. It's comfort food. It's like putting on that old pair of jeans that fits just
It's
right,
it's
right?
it's only comfort while you're eating it.
Yeah.
Everything else is guilt
Right,
and hate,
you're like, what
self-hatred.
the hell? And I love me some McDonald's French fries. Don't get me wrong, but yeah,
Yeah.
related, you're like, why'd I eat that? Um, at least at our age, right? When we were younger, it didn't matter. But yeah, I think there's, when you get into you hear his voice, in your head when you're reading, you get into the story. He pulls you in, and you don't want to read anything else.
Mhm.
And I think that for me, anyway, yeah, if I had to pick, it would be his books, his novels for sure.
That's what everyone chooses. And I went with the short stories. And the reason why I went with the short stories is well, there's two reasons. One, because I'm hosting a podcast here
Good answer.
based on his short stories, right? But secondly, there's so much more. But a lot of people say, when it comes down to it, it's what we were talking about before. It comes down to the characters, and in the shorter stories, especially just the plain old short stories, you don't get as much character and the onion type of story where you get to learn all about the
Right.
character, sort of like a literary device that he uses when when he's writing these stories. So yeah, I absolutely agree with that, and I should now change my opinion, but I'm probably going to hold on
No,
to it
no, you know
steadfast.
what? I was on the fence about that answer too, Jason, because like I said before, I am a huge fan of his short story collection, starting with the best one, the most
Hmm.
iconic one. And it just because it's a different experience. Like you were saying, there's no time to really get into deep character development and story arcs. It's start and stop, and with a few exceptions, I mean, he's done novella collections, which are obviously a little bit different, but um, it takes real skill. I mean, it takes real skill to do a long story, right? Long form,
Hmm.
but a short story is really, really a challenge, and he's a master at it, even to this day. So I can see where you would choose that. I was on the fence while we were talking. I'm thinking, okay, I know me, but when he comes out with a story collection, I love him just because
Hmm.
it's a real Um, it's a real fun ride, and it's like you're getting all these little books in one book, in a
Yeah.
way.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, well, it's like bite-sized,
Yeah,
Stephen King. Not to be too corny with
right.
the,
Hey, no, that's perfect, man. It's perfect.
So, what is your history with reading, this particular short story, Gray Matter?
So, as I mentioned before, Night Shift, obviously King's first collection of short stories. It's my favorite, even though I love all of his short story collections. I actually pick this book up at least once every 5, 6 years or so and read it. Now, I did reread both stories because I think the last time I read this collection again was a couple years ago. So I wanted it sort of fresh in my head. And when I was going through and rereading both Gray Matter and the other story that you asked me to talk about, it's vintage King.
Mhm.
That's why I love this collection so much. A little bit because you can tell there's so many. First of all, there's so many stories in these collections that were made into movies, especially
Mhm.
in the 80s and some a little bit later. But they're so iconic, and including the one that he starts off with in this collection. But getting back to the story in question, I mean, it's vintage King. It's set in Bangor. It's got sort of classic Stephen King characters. You got a group of old men that hang out at this corner store called the Night Owl. They're Mainers, or as a friend of mine who's from Maine said, maniacs. It's just classic King. And then you have the little boy who's worried about his dad, who's not a very nice man, Richie
Mhm.
Kennedy. Timmy comes to the store, and he's worried about his dad. So two of the old men, one of them I believe is Henry, um, and another friend of his, they decide, well, let's go and see what's up. And it's not going to end well.
Mhm.
And it's pure joy to read.
Absolutely.
And it's a classic King. It's small town New England. During the winter, and it's a perfect setup for something. It's going to go into a very dark place, and it does.
Yeah.
Um, and it's funny though because I don't really, when I reread this story, I didn't really remember much of it. So it was almost like reading it for the first time again.
Yeah, I had that similar with a lot of these because I read this book, I think, in the 90s.
Oh, really?
Was my Yeah, I came to Stephen King's shorter works a little bit later,
Yeah.
but I think it was the late 90s when I read this, and I pretty much forgot every story except for, like, the big ones, like the Mangler. I kinda remembered that one a bit,
Yeah.
but, this one, I was just like, "Yeah, Gray Matter," I kinda remember it, but, yeah, it was like reading it again for the second time. So we're gonna be moving into Gray Matter now, and I just wanna give a fair warning to the listener. We will be spoiling this story as we do,
Yeah.
on this show. I mean, they're short stories, so I invite you to go read the short story and then come back. It was first published in Cavalier Magazine, October of 1973, and, of course, it was collected here in Night Shift, uh nine released in 1978, which is Stephen King's first short story collection. Um, and it was also actually reprinted in The Living Dead 2008, which was and adapted into comics and a television episode for, I believe it was Shudder's Creep Show,
Oh, wow. I didn't
the
know that.
reboot, season one, episode two.
Huh.
I have not seen that, but, I might watch that, I don't know. So you mentioned what the story is about. The little boy, comes into the store and he starts talking about, he's there to pick up beer for his dad, which he's been doing for a
Yeah.
while, and, he's worried about his dad, and so everyone in the store, they decide that they're gonna go and see what's going on. Um, now, um, excuse me, the story involves it has a lot of body horror to it because
Oh, yeah.
the kid tells Henry, I think it is,
Yeah.
everything that's going on,
Yeah.
uh, and, you could sum it up to a child's imagination, if you think, but, yeah, obviously, the ending will
Yeah.
show you that it's not a child's imagination. But how did the body horror affect you?
Yeah. And this is another thing too that, King then and King now. I mean, obviously a little bit older. I mean, his stuff is still scary and eerie and creepy. But you can tell there's a different Stephen King now than there was then. So I think, he's not afraid to sort of gleefully kind of peel back the curtain, and be a little bit more gory than he's probably known for, at least now. But this story, it's sort of a perfect setup. The little boy comes and tells them, my dad's really, and they all know that Richie Grenadine is not a nice guy. He's a drunk and he probably beats his kid and yada, yada, yada. And then the little boy starts telling them about the beer. And this is the part that I didn't see coming. And for those that haven't read the story, as Jason said, spoiler alert. So he basically infers that his dad had a beer and then mentioned to him that it tasted really bad. It was the worst beer he ever had, but he continued to drink it.
He finished. Well, that's the story of the alcoholic, right? They'll
Right.
go through it no matter what.
And then of course that's when Daryl Dad started to change. Hence the term gray matter. And it was this really interesting, like you were mentioning, Jason, body horror moment where his father started to sort of change into this fungoid thing, this gray, shapeless thing, that begins to act even more violent, but can't leave the apartment, can't leave his flat. In fact, and this is another great thing too, and it's purely New England, I'm sure, where it's they live in an apartment in an old Victorian house. So, I mean, come on, that's creepy to begin with, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so his father starts acting really weird. He doesn't get up from his easy chair. He continues to drink, and he turns into this fungoid thing that's, not doesn't really resemble a human being by the end of the story. And then I believe there's a part where he eats a cat. His son actually peeks through a peephole and sees his father eating a cat, which I'm a cat person, so that kind of made me wince. Um, but yeah, definitely a lot of body horror in that one. And
It's like what else are you eating, Dad?
right. And I mean, King too. I mean, he wrote this story, and published it in '73. Probably wrote it in '73 or '72. But I find it interesting, especially reading these early works where alcoholism rears its head. Like he did in The Shining and a number of other of his works in that period of time. Even then, even though he didn't really know his father, since his father, left his mother and his brother when he was very young.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's another one of those sort of, I don't know if they're exercising demons, but things sort of coming out, even at that early age, of his adulthood, I thought was
Yeah.
really interesting too.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think it's go ahead. Were you?
Oh no, I was just going to say it's just one of those, it's a fun horror story, but kind of a between the lines, that kind of, and I don't know if it was written that his biological father was an alcoholic. I know that he wrote, which I'd always found interesting, that King found some of his father's writings in a footlocker or something like that. But anyway, alcoholism being a theme,
Yeah.
I thought was interesting.
It's interesting too that he was in this time period. He was becoming an alcoholic himself.
Yeah.
And I think some of this is like uh, a lot of people say that they use writing or doing their art as a form of communication. And I think maybe, I don't know what you think about this, but it seems like he's still writing about alcoholics now today,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But he always has. And I think in the beginning, it was him showing himself.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think for example, in The Shining, I think that's the biggest example of him. You know, we write for different reasons, right? We write what we love. We write what we know. Uh, and maybe for him, that was, he used to say when he wrote Pet Cemetery and then he put it away because he scared himself so much being a family
Hmm.
man. But I think The Shining too, was King really writing about his own worst fears, not being able to write, because Jack Torrance is a creator. Um, the alcoholism, you know, rearing its ugly head again and
Hmm.
changing his life for the worse. So I think that even back then, like you were saying, he was probably full on drinking every day. That was probably him writing about his worst fears, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, excuse me here. Um, Now, this story actually had some hints, I thought, of like stories like Storm of the Century. Have you seen that?
Oh yeah, yeah, I love Storm of the Century. Kind of wish King would have written a book about that, but I have the mini series on DVD, and
Yeah,
yeah,
me too.
obviously the weather plays a big part, the isolation, and of course the Andre Lenoge being stuck in the jail cell. It's a great book.
Yeah.
You're right. Yeah, I've never thought about that on my reread of Gray Matter, but you're absolutely right. It definitely plays a big part.
I think it just has the same sort of setting. You have like a small town, a big snowstorm is just hitting. But did you feel that the snowstorm added to the story, or was it even really needed in Gray Matter?
Uh, I mean, probably as far as where the story went, it probably. I think if they would have been in a situation where they were trapped because the weather didn't allow them to travel, maybe. But I don't necessarily think it was a big part of the story.
Yeah. One thing I really love about this story is it's ambiguous. I ambiguity in fiction really gets my imagination running, which is a form of contention between me and my wife because she wants stories explained. She wants the
So I'm
explanation,
guessing
right?
she's not a big Paul Tremblay fan.
No, she definitely wouldn't be. But how do you feel about the ambiguous feel to this story?
Oh, I just loved it still.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what makes horror so much fun. I mean, granted, I'd like to think, drinking some bad beer wouldn't make us turn into a fungal, ravenous fungal monster.
Fungal slug beast.
But, there's, there's, but you don't have to have, like the everything spelled out. It's just a fun story. I mean, fun to be the reader, not who's in the story. It's just a fun story, and you don't have to have it fully explained by the end. The way that it sort of stops is perfect.
Hmm.
It's just one of those stories that, it's just a blast to read, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I was wondering also, what did you think of the way it was presented? It's the story's narrative. It's a bit of a frame story because there's a story within the story,
Story
all
within a
contained
story.
within like 20 pages, right? But it also kind of the point of view kind of bounces around a little bit.
Well, having done that myself, if you remember, Mr. Jack is a story within a story.
Yeah.
um, I didn't have a problem with it at all. I thought it was fairly straightforward. It's at one point I think Henry is telling what he heard from Timmy, and then of course it continues on in current times. So I think King is even then, is skillful enough to where it doesn't detract from, at least to me, upon rereading. And I reread this a month ago, so to me it didn't detract from it at all.
No. No, I found it quite interesting though because it's just a short story. It's like 20, 25 pages, I think.
Right.
Maybe 30 at the most, I forget. But um it King is such like a word smith that he can get away with this type of stuff where if I tried writing a story in that similar style, I'd probably mess it up somewhere. but but he's very good at making these short compact stories with a kind of a comp on the surface it seems easy, but if you really dig into the wording
Yeah.
and how it's presented, it's quite complicated.
Oh, definitely. And, not at all to compare myself to Mr. King, because doesn't even come close. But I knew when I wrote Mr. Jack, shameless self promotion, I was taking a risk doing that same thing. Um, Obviously, it turned out pretty well for me. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, not anybody, including myself, could do something like that the way that he does and make it a seamless story. Because sometimes when you do that shift in narrative, where you dive into somebody recounting a story, then it sometimes turns into that, you're telling me instead of showing me. But the way that he just pulls you through it all the way
Yeah,
is a gift.
it is. It's a crazy gift, and I wish I could I wish I could emulate it sometimes. I want to talk about the ending before we stop here because that the ending I thought was interesting because there's a group of them that go to the boy's house and they confront. Well, they knock on the door and they're like, "We got your beer, come and get it." And they want to confront the father because of what the boy told them, right? And he doesn't want to come out. He's like, "No, just leave it, out there, and I'll get the beer." But they're like, "No, you're coming out. We're going to talk to you, right?" Basically. And so he comes out. He bursts through the door,
Right.
and what they see horrifies them.
Right.
I like that a few of them return, but they left Henry there to take care of the the
Well,
thing,
he had the
the
gun.
creature.
So.
And then they see something interesting before they leave. They see that it's like splitting into two, and that creates in this narrator the idea that it's just going to keep splitting up until
Right.
it takes over the whole world.
Right.
So,
Which was an absolutely, and again, that was another, and I'm glad you brought that up too, because that last line too,
mhm.
he's not completely, he's like, oh shit, what's going to happen? Um, to me, that's like the absolute perfect horror story ending.
Mhm.
And I know it probably would drive some readers crazy because they want to know, well, what else is going to happen? But you don't, I mean, that's the beauty of horror. You don't, it's perfect water cooler talk, when we had water coolers. Um, for discussions like this, is it leaves it open ended for interpretation as far as what would have happened. Um, would this thing have gotten out of the flat, the Victorian house? Would it have started to infect the town? Then it turns into a Stephen King novel, which would be cool, but self-contained into a 20-page short story is perfect.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of reading a horror short story like this.
It's also really good that it ends on a what if question. Like,
Exactly.
what if this new paranoia is gonna happen that way, and that's the way it's gonna be? Because as they're leaving the house, they hear 3 shots, I believe it is, from
Yeah.
Henry's rifle. So he could have killed it. You don't know if it's gonna actually split into so many different beings and take
Right.
over the
'Cause What
world,
could
but
a what could a high caliber bullet do to a shapeless?
this gelatinous creature.
So yeah, exactly. So I mean, but yeah, it's one of those, just it's like I said, it's just a perfect, like pretty much everything else in this collection. It's just a perfect horror story.
Yeah. All right. So I think that pretty much covers it. Like I said, it's a pretty short story, and the next one is even shorter.
But no less fun. But no
Yeah,
less fun.
it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But before we go for this episode, I want to thank you again for joining me. This was a lot of fun. So where can listeners? Oh, first of all, what are you working on right now?
Well, what I'm working on right now, I think I might have sneak previewed it before. So several years ago, I released this book called The Ravening, which is a sci-fi horror novel.
Hmm.
Um, I'm working on the follow-up, or not really sequel, a follow-up called Island of Devils, and that one takes many of the characters in The Ravening and brings them back, introduces some new characters, sort of finishing the story that's the much larger story that's kind of hinted at in The Ravening. So I'm working on that right now. I'm in the middle of edits. I'm hopefully to send to my editor here in about a month, and then I'm hopefully should be out by fall.
Awesome. Where can people find you online should they wish to follow you?
Yeah, so I'm on, Facebook, of course, Instagram. I'm on X, although I'm not really active too much there these days. I'm on Blue Sky. Just look for my name. You should be able to easily follow me or easily find me. And then I also have a web page too.
Awesome. So next episode, we're going to be discussing Battleground. And before we go, if anyone out there wishes to support the show, they can do so easily by just giving the show a like on Apple Podcasts and or giving it a 5-star review and leaving a review. That helps Apple share the show with other people, and we can grow. That would be awesome. And if you really want to support the show with your hard earned money, you can join the Patreon. There is a Stephen King tier there called the Deadlights Club.
Right.
And that you'll have some exclusive podcast content there. And it's only $4 a month. So everyone is invited to go and join that if they can and if they wish. Thank you, Chris.
Thank
And we will
you.
we will be talking to you again very shortly.
Awesome. Look forward to it.
Okay, before actually I can stop the recording here. Before